So I've been making soap since the fall of 2012, and when I started off it was just a way to make some gifts for the holidays. And since I was making it for my family and friends, I wanted to make sure to try and use the best ingredients possible, because I found out that anything that you rub on your skin absorbs into your bloodstream in 26 seconds. And I got to thinking, well, if I'm growing food and trying to get into these alternate lifestyles and cleaner lifestyles, then what's in my soap? So that's kind of where it all started. I'll show you how I make my soap today. And in essence, you warm up oils, which I use plant-based oils, and then you mix water with lye, which is a caustic chemical. It's sodium hydroxide is what I use to make bar soap. The lye solution with the water and the oils react with each other to create our saponified oils, which is soap. And it also makes glycerin, which most soap companies take the glycerin out of the soap to make other products, other beauty products with it. It's all natural. I use plant-based exfoliants, plant-based coloring, and of course essential oils, so you name it. But I'll go through the tools you need and what you need to make some in your kitchen. You're going to need a nice stainless steel or enamel pot. The oils, as I mentioned before. It's nice if you have an immersion blender. That helps cut down the amount of time it takes to stir. Otherwise, a stainless steel spoon, 2 thermometers, one for measuring oil, one for measuring your lye solution, gloves, glasses, containers for weighing and measuring and holding things, a digital scale. Vinegar really helps for in case you get burnt by the lye. This neutralizes it. Essential oils are nice for the smells. I use plant-based exfoliants and colorants, and then a squeegee deal for scraping out the pot when we're done. And some wipes or rags are of course very handy, something to jot down, maybe even a calculator to keep track of your recipe. That's about it. Oh yeah, and then you of course need a mold. You can use anything like I said. This is barnwood box with my turkey bag, which I just cut open to make a big blanket. When making soap, you're going to want to start with a clean kitchen, and you're going to want to kind of put all the food away and just have a clean countertop, clean space for all this stuff, because when you're using lye, some people use it to clean, not very much anymore, but it's also used to make pretzels and whatnot, but it will burn your skin. You don't want to accidentally ingest it, or but when it dissolves in water, if the water's clean, it's completely clear. Now today I'm using an infusion of hibiscus. It's basically just hibiscus tea. So you won't be able to see that quite as much, but I will shoot another little time lapse of mixing in the lye, and then the water is just crystal clear afterwards. But anyways, that brings me to the first step, and start with a clean kitchen, get all your tools together, and when you're working with lye, you have to have either a glass pitcher or stainless steel or ceramic, but you cannot use aluminum because it will react with the lye and no good. And you can't use plastic or anything like that. So when working with lye, you want to make sure to have gloves and goggles, safety glasses, whatnot, and be very careful with measuring it. That's where you can look up the saponification values when it comes to making a recipe online, and those are basically for every ounce of oil, depending on what kind of oil it is, it will need a very specific amount of lye to react, and then there'd be no leftover lye. And in order to be safe when making bars for your skin and stuff like that, you put in a little extra fat in the recipe, and that's called super fat, super fatting the recipe. So I'll show you right quick. The first step is measuring the lye and mixing it with your water. And what's really important about this is you always add lye to water. If you add water to lye, you will get an explosion. That is bad news. So I'm going to measure out my liquid first, get that set aside in my pitcher, measure out my lye, making sure to stay far away from the liquid. And then I'll add the lye to the liquid, making sure to stir constantly, because these are like micro beads that I have here, and they do dissolve quickly, but you want to keep the water moving because they'll clump back up at the bottom. So here comes the action after all that talking. But a good thing to keep in mind with this lye is that it's actually food grade. So you can make pretzels, lutefisk, you know, what have you with it. And that basically means that there are next to no heavy metals in it. And there's tech grade, which is for making soap and that. But it was just recommended and it was available online to get food grade. So it's the highest grade of lye that you can get. It's just sodium hydroxide. And it's safe enough to eat, you know, given the safe food preparation techniques. That's just a little mind at ease type of deal because you have to use lye to make soap. And if you're making a melt and pour soap, you're using glycerin, which is a byproduct of making soap. So even if you say, oh well, I melt and pour my soaps, I don't use lye, well, that glycerin that you're using is a product of lye. So you just have to use lye in order to make soap. If you're talking about detergent, you're getting into a whole different, you know. But to make soap, you need to use lye. So this is old school, but it's very technical, very precise and measured and, you know, safe. So now that the lye mixture has been prepared, that's going to take a while to cool down, and that's why I did it first. So I've set that aside, and there's a good chance I'm going to have to cool it down when everything else is ready. You want your lye to be between 90 and 95 degrees. So now my lye mixture is down to... You want them to be between 110 and 120. So you've got these two separate pots that you're kind of trying to get just at the right temperature while everything else is ready and in place, like essential oils, exfoliants, your soap mold, etc. So now that that's cooling off, I'm going to weigh out my oils and get those kind of heating up and mixing up. So as you can see now, the oils are all melted down and it's just clean looking, you know. So now my lye mixture is down to about 93 degrees. Got my oats weighed out, my essential oils ready, and my oil should be at the right temperature. Now for the magic, and this is where obviously oil and water don't mix, but that's why you've got lye in with the water. Make sure to stir it nice and steady, but not so much that it splashes on you. You'll see right away we were changing colors and it's getting more cloudy, and that's basically a chemical reaction taking place. And before I had the immersion blender, I would have to hand stir a batch from anywhere from like an hour and a half to as long as 6 hours one time it took me. It's thickening up is what's happening. And you're going for that trace. So to speed things along, use a little solar power out here to fire up this immersion blender. So the whole idea here is that you're stirring it long enough to get it to thicken up to where it'll hold, and that is mixed enough to where it won't separate when you pour it into the molds. And they call that tracing. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second once it thickens up. This is going to take a little while. So it's just now starting to trace. I like to get it really thick because I end up putting some exfoliants in there that I want to kind of spread equally throughout the bar, so I'm going to keep hitting it. And you don't want it to thicken up too much on you to where it turns into a huge yogurt. So I'm going to start adding my exfoliants now. Ooh, got a little hair down there. And you'll see I added some other stuff there. That's those other exfoliants there are kelp and lavender buds. And just by seeing how mixed in those are too, it kind of helps me have an idea of how mixed in this essential oil is. And you want to really mix it well after you add the essential oils as well. Now with the light being at a different angle, you can kind of see what I'm talking about with the trace. Right there you can see how it's kind of layering up on itself, like whatever dropped is kind of sitting right on the surface. That's what I'm talking about when I say trace. And that's just a term in the industry that they use. You want to stir it until it traces. As you can tell, it's gotten very thick, very delicious looking. I just use a squeegee to scrape them out. Now I'm just going to kind of smooth this out, and then it has to sit for 2 days to cure up enough to be hard enough to cut. And then after you cut it, it needs to sit for about 3 weeks to finish the chemical reaction and be some nice hard soap that'll last a good long while. You want to cover it up with a blanket to keep the chemical reaction going and whatnot, like especially if you're putting it in a cool spot in your house, just cover it with a nice blanket. And of course, like I'm going to take this and double back over. I usually put a couple slats of wood right here to keep the plastic from sinking down into the soap, and kind of keeps the top looking good, keeps it to where it can cure up proper. And then we have cats around here, so I put this on top just in case one of them goes to get on top of it. So then after 2 days of sitting, they'll look like this. You can tell it's a little darker in the center. This is the bottom side. I just flipped it over and letting this air out a little bit before I cut it. And so this one I made probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 days ago. And this one I made probably about a week ago. Put lavender buds as well as little bits of black raspberry in there from the farm here. And then the mossy stone has kelp and lavender buds in it. Both kind of a floral scent, but I'm going to cut them up now. And here's my mold where I've got my distance set there. I'm going to put the or whatever big blocks in and cut strips out of them. Loaves are what they call them. And then I'm going to use another mold to cut those loaves into bars. Now you see the gist of it. And originally how I got the size of my bars was I was using these spatulas to cut them out, and I was just outlining the edges, and all the bars laid flat in my game board box, and then that's just the size they became, and kind of the rest is history. That's how deep the mold was or whatever, for how whatever, but yeah. That's that. And it just so happened to work out with that board game that it came out to exactly 48 bars per batch. No like partial bars, just a synchronicity that happened to add up to the exact dimensions of the box. It must have been meant to be. I gotta go. Now that you've seen how soap is made, you might have a better understanding of what it really is, and now I got to get to cutting some and maybe going outside and getting something done, like pruning some grapes. So tune into some other videos if you want to see a few of the other things we did today. It's kind of spring frenzy, even though it's early March. We're starting seeds and pruning grapes and spreading some mulch, getting the gardens ready, because later this week we're going to be planting peas, and next week we'll be planting potatoes and beets and hopefully onions, but it doesn't seem like we can find the sets around here early enough. But anyways, I gotta go. See you next time.